Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Nonprofit Leaders Academy. As you all know, I am Janise Wiggins, the creator of the Nonprofit Leaders Academy, and my company is Grant Me Success. We help organizations with grant education, grant writing, and educate nonprofits on various topics that will help the nonprofit organization to operate more efficiently and effectively. And today I have a wonderful guest here with me, Miss Phyllis Johnson of PKJ Consulting, and she is here to share with us information about nonprofit accounting and bookkeeping. Phyllis has years of background in accounting and bookkeeping. She helps nonprofit and small businesses with accounting, bookkeeping, consulting, taxes, payroll. She helps startup organizations as well as existing organizations. She's originally from Northern California. She graduated from Pepperdine University with a business degree and minored in accounting and finance, and then also has an MBA from here at UNLV. So she is one of my alumni sisters, and I am so happy to have her here with us to share more. There is something else that you and I share in common, Phyllis. We really love travel. And let me tell you, every time that I'm looking to see what Phyllis is doing, Phyllis is traveling. So why don't we start this conversation off by you telling us a little bit more about yourself. Who is Phyllis Johnson?
Thank you so much for having me. First of all, I appreciate it. So as she said, my name is Phyllis Johnson. I'm originally from Northern California, Oakland. Grew up there and moved down to Southern California, went to Pepperdine, moved to Vegas so many years ago. When I am not running my business, which I started about 8.5 years ago, like she said, I am traveling. What I found is traveling is my peace. And when I kind of built my company, one of the things that I actually decided to do when I started was to build it so it could be a remote company. So 95% of the people that work for me and myself are all remote workers. In addition to that, I have an amazing daughter who just started high school. And I also am trying to master Español porque me gusta viajar a México mucho veces.
Oh,
so yeah.
muy bien, Phyllis. All right. So Phyllis, you were really ahead of the curve then when the pandemic started, because you had built your company, as you said, in a virtual environment already. So you were light years ahead, I'm sure. And I'm sure that assisted your clients, and you were able to offer some feedback to your clients as well about that.
Yes. So before I actually started my own company, I was working for a company here in Henderson, Nevada, which if you're watching this, wherever you're watching it, it's right next door to Las Vegas.
Yeah.
And they moved the company to Utah. So I was one of the few remote workers who was still working at home and then ended up flying back and forth to Utah once a month. So I started understanding the infrastructure of working from home and also the infrastructure of really being able to work anywhere because it was a telecommunications type company. So when I started my company, I understood like the setup, the security measures, all the things that are needed so that when I am somewhere on a cruise ship or in Mexico or South Africa or anything, I'm not really having to not service my clients. I'm just in a different place while making things happen. But it also opened me up to work with clients anywhere, even as far as New Zealand and Costa Rica.
Wow, that's awesome. Fabulous. So tell us, I know that your educational background is in business administration with that emphasis in accounting and financing, but what inspired you? I'm always interested to know what inspired you to enter into the finance and accounting sector?
So I've always been a numbers nerd ever since I was a kid. Math has always been my favorite subject. And so it's just something I've been always passionate about. My mom worked at the IRS for 30 years. And even though she worked at the IRS, she wasn't really a numbers person. She was more on the social side. And then my dad worked at the Bank of America. So just kind of growing up in a family where they worked in organizations that were numbered based, but also had a social aspect to their job title, kind of helped me to balance out both. When I was in high school, I took an accounting course and I fell in love with it. Although I did want to be a teacher. And so I kind of have bridged the gap between the two of those, right? So having my company, I'm able to do the accounting piece, but I'm also able to do a lot of trainings and teachings and seminars to help other businesses, understand their finances.
Yeah, that's awesome. And tell us how it is that you came about. You said that you started your company about 8 years ago. What led you to that? And what things did you face? What type of decisions did you have to make in starting your business? Give us an idea of what that experience was like for you.
Ooh, the fun stuff. So so anyone who's from Northern California, there's a lot of like small businesses, a lot of mom and pop stores. And so growing up, I would always see them open and then close. And it wasn't until I kind of got to college I understood it, like the reason why. And it wasn't because they weren't a great restaurant, couldn't cook, or a great chef or anything like that. It was just finance operation stuff. And so my grandmother had 6 brothers and they all had businesses. So it's just always kind of been something I've wanted to do. My master's degree is in a focus in entrepreneurship management. So I had been talking about doing it for years, but, we all get caught up in the fun corporate America, the W-2 life, which is great. It's nothing wrong with it. It's a beautiful thing. But for me, I just knew something else was calling me. And so even though I've always had a W-2 job, I've always ended up like kind of doing taxes on the side, consulting on the side. I've always had something on the side that I was always doing. So I was working this job and I would say, I did this whole business plan and stuff, but I'm going to be honest, I just decided one day that it was just going to be, I was going to just do it.
You just jumped in. You were just like ignorance on fire. That's what I call it. Ignorance on fire.
There are 2 types of business owners. There's some that plan out every single detail and they may take 3 or 4 years to get it off the ground. And there's others like myself who I just ripped the Band-Aid off. I was working at this company that just wasn't the type of company that I should be working for. Ripped the Band-Aid off. I gave myself 6 months. So I said, I got 6 months to do this. I had an HR background at that point as well. And understood like after 6 months, they started to question why. It will be 6 months and I was gonna go back to a W-2 or I was just going to keep this going because I figured I didn't want to woulda, shoulda, coulda. So I jumped head first. I took every seminar, every training. I mean, I just became engulfed in it. It's been 8.5 years and I am pretty much unhireable as a W-2 person at this point. So it's been a great journey. I can honestly say that.
No looking back. No looking back. And I'm sure you went through like a process of recruiting your first clients and then, seeing some growth and then learning about marketing and branding and all of that kind of stuff. What is it that you would say that you like the most about accounting and finance and working as a business owner in this sector?
So personally, I mean, for me, the reason I started my business really was a lot of people, I can talk debits and credits and financials all day. And that really goes over a lot of people's head. A lot of people want to understand that information because they want to help grow their business. They want to do something with their business, right? So for me, my thing is I want my daughter to be able to go to whatever college she wants. I want her to be able to do whatever she wants in life without any financial restrictions. And I want to be able to be there for her, right? So sometimes when you're working a regular job before the pandemic, you couldn't just leave your job in the middle of the day, right? So as a business owner, my daughter needs something. She says she left something at home. You could just stop and go, whatever award ceremonies, you just go. So my passion really comes from helping other small businesses, like seeing their success, seeing them get that grant or that loan or that funding or them opening up another location and really being that back office to them, especially my creatives who just, they don't know numbers and they don't want to learn it. And, they don't want to do it. So my passion really comes from seeing not just so much like the numbers part, it's just seeing that I'm helping someone who just doesn't want to, or just, seeing like them learn what they need to learn to help their business.
Yeah. And that sounds like that is a skill that you have that is really beneficial for a lot of other people. Like you said, you enjoyed math in high school. I'm not saying that I didn't enjoy math, but when I got to like that honors trigonometry class, I was like, it's not the place for me. I think I belong over in the social sciences, so I kind of switched gears there. But you are really that person, like you said, who can be a backbone, hold the hands of the creatives, right? People who are not necessarily into math or the hard sciences, or they think budgeting is just so difficult or hard to learn. And that's good that you're able to work with those individuals as well. They use the skills and talents that they have. You bring something along with it, and you guys are able to see other companies grow. And that must be very fulfilling for you. What would you say maybe are some things that you like the least about working in finance or accounting and bookkeeping?
So the same thing I love is probably the same thing that I struggle with. I'm a huge introvert. So although I love the people side of it, sometimes because if you don't understand the financials, it's sometimes hard to that piece of the continual customer as an introvert. Sometimes okay, I gotta take a break, aka go somewhere and travel.
Yeah,
the other part
that engagement is a lot for you.
It's sometimes it's like, okay, but it's a blessing, because if I don't have anyone to engage with, I don't have any clients. So, so that's a blessing to have that. I would say the other thing is marketing. Like, I have no desire to post about myself or I call it bragging, but really to kind of do that part. So I have someone who does that for me. She creates the Instagram reels and the LinkedIn and all that stuff, because what I've learned is the same thing I tell other people. If you don't like it, you're not going to do it. Or if you're going to do it, you're going to be dragging yourself. Same thing why people delay on doing their tax returns or their bookkeeping, or they don't like to do it. They're never going to do it. But it's certain things are a necessary part of your business. So what I've learned is things I just really do not like, hire someone to help me, or to just 100% trust that they can do it and take care of it for me.
Yeah, that's awesome. Awesome advice. I hope you guys are listening up, taking notes, and receiving these jewels, that Miss Phyllis is sharing with us. I know we just getting started, but she's already been dropping some really helpful jewels for small businesses as well as nonprofits. And so, speaking of nonprofits, at what point did you begin to work with nonprofit organizations? Did you start out your company with a focus on nonprofit organizations, or did that just kind of develop as you were seeking and recruiting clients?
So honestly, no. So previously, throughout my business, I had done tax returns for nonprofits, right? So they had their financials together, did the tax return, have a great day. In 2020, my mom passed from cancer, and she was one of those people who, she did a lot in her life, but she wasn't someone who bragged or talked about it. She just kind of just did stuff. So it was at her funeral, actually, that I found out that she had actually started a school, a charter school in the Bay Area that was still open 40 years later. Like, her and my dad had started it together. And I didn't find this out till the funeral. So it was like, tell me this thing, and so it just became this kind of calling for me to give back in that aspect of, like, when I lived in California, I did a lot of like charity work, donations, all that stuff. Moved to Vegas and hadn't done it in years, to be honest with you. And so it just became this thing that became my goal, to really start working more with nonprofits. And honestly, I believe in manifestation with action plan behind it. And so honestly, within like 2 months, one of my clients who runs a for-profit and also a nonprofit that you and I both know reached out to me to do the bookkeeping for her nonprofit, and then to be on the board. And then another client who helped me start my business all these years ago, that was a nonprofit. Unfortunately, their bookkeeper passed away. So it was like all of a sudden, all these opportunities to work with nonprofits came about. Yeah. And so now after all these years, I've jumped in and I understand it. There's always still more to learn, but yeah, that's kind of how I got my start in really having quite a few nonprofit clients.
Wow. Yeah, I didn't know that about you and your mom and her story. And thank you so much for sharing that. It definitely allows me and I think people in general to understand that when people start small businesses or they're working with specific clientele, there is oftentimes a backstory to that. And I'm always interested in the backstory because I know that we as individuals are so much more. We're so complex. Our stories are complex. Our experience are multivariate. We've been through this or that. And it seems like the time and the years just go by and go by. And you end up in this situation or position, kind of like me. How did you become a grant writer? Well, I didn't go to school for grant writing. There was just kind of like this path of experiences that just led me. And it sounds like that there was a path starting with your mom and her story that led you to this wonderful work in working with charitable organizations. So I want to get into a little bit of the meat for those that are watching who may be board members, who may be staff, who may be volunteers of nonprofit organizations, and they're trying to understand this numbers thing, right? And why accounting and bookkeeping is so important in general, but how it might be different between for-profit organizations and working in nonprofit. So can you help us, just give us a little bit, something to chew on about what is the difference between for-profit and nonprofit accounting? I mean, is there any difference? If so, what might that be? What might I need to know if I were a nonprofit leader?
So there are quite a few differences between nonprofit accounting and for-profit. So the similarities are you still need to do the bookkeeping. You still need to record all your transactions and keep track of everything. For nonprofit accounting, honestly, is way more difficult than for-profit. And the reason is that when it comes to for-profit, it really is your business, right? You're keeping track. You don't really have people to answer to unless you have a C Corp and you have shareholders, right? When you have a nonprofit, you have donations, you have grants, you have people giving you money that will hold you accountable. They want to know, hey, if I gave you this $100,000 to do this program, I need to know, what did you spend this money on? And not only that, they want to know very specific details. How much was office supplies? What type of office supplies did you buy? Why did you buy them? What's the date for them? Okay, well, you hired this person. Okay, maybe that person's a full-time. How many hours did they work on this specific program? So it's very important in the nonprofit world that as you grow, really, that you get really specific and detailed with your funding, because in order to get more funding, in order for you to grow, you have to have your financials in order. They have to be accurate.
So it sounds like it's just a bit more complex in that, like you said, there's a lot more accountability, perhaps. Not that there's not accountability in the for-profit sector, but if I'm a solo entrepreneur and it's just me and my business, most often my customers are not coming back after they've received a product or a service from me saying, how did you spend that revenue from your business, right? Whereas in the nonprofit sector, what it sounds like you're saying is that when you're receiving these donations or you're receiving grants, there are people kind of over your shoulder saying, now, how did you spend that $50 donation? Or, and that's understandable, because what we've talked about here in the Nonprofit Leaders Academy in some previous sessions is that a nonprofit is a public charity. It doesn't belong to any one person, it belongs to the public. And so the public has the right to know. The books are kind of open. There's this idea of sharing information in a way that it's maybe not that way in the for-profit sector.
True.
Yeah, yeah. So tell us about a few of the accounting software or packages. I've heard some people refer to them that way. That might be helpful for nonprofits that are looking to say, okay, we're a new nonprofit organization. We know that we need to keep track of things. We know that we need to be participating in this thing called bookkeeping. We don't really know what it is. What might be out there for organizations that are not yet working with a professional bookkeeper?
So there's quite a few software programs. There's FreshBooks, there's Wave, there's Zoho Books, there's Zero. I'll go with the last one last, right? And so some of the lower price ones, right? They're great for when you first start because it's the same thing. You're keeping track of your income, expenses, having those reports. The one I'm always going to recommend those QuickBooks. And the main reason is that you want a program or software that has the ability, like I talked about, that has program tracking. So let's just say your nonprofit is doing a program to help underserved kids in the community, right? You're doing a program where you're offering them basketball services. Maybe you also have a grant from the state of Nevada for $200,000 to, maybe feed the homeless. You have to account for those differently. Your accounting software should be able to do that. A lot of these other softwares, they don't do that, and it makes it significantly harder to keep track. So in the beginning, you use those type of softwares, that's great, because I always say don't spend it, especially if you're a nonprofit, if you don't have it. But as you start to really get more and more funding, the bookkeeping software like QuickBooks or something, that should be in your budget, right? You build that into your budget, build that into what you're asking if you're getting this donation. The reason for that is you want to be able to keep track of every expense and every dollar by program, because at any time, if the state of Nevada says, hey, we're going to give you another $200,000, we want to see what you spent on just for this program. You want to be able to just do it yourself if you learn how to run a report and send it over, versus jumping into any other software and then having to kind of hurry up and manipulate the information and then spend all this time and you may lose out on the opportunity.
Yeah. So to break it down a little bit for those people who may be new and maybe they're not experiencing this already, sounds like you're recommending a software that might be able to segregate funds or split out the funds. So when people donate to nonprofit organizations, they may be making a donation with no restrictions, meaning they're not saying how you need to spend that money. They're not saying, oh, you have to spend it on this specific program for the homeless or this program for the youth. They can give a donation unrestricted and say, spend the money how the organization sees fit, whether it's on operations or this youth program or food pantry, whatever program your organization has. But then there are times as your organization gets a little bit more sophisticated and perhaps begins to receive grant funds, oftentimes grant funds or certain larger donations might be restricted. And they will say, you can only spend this money on this program. Let's say it's an after-school tutoring program. Well, we're giving you $50,000 for this after-school tutoring program, and that's all you can spend it on. But if you also have this homeless feeding program, maybe lunch or dinner, you can't spend that $50,000 on the homeless program. And so your software needs to be able to split out those funds, because in your bank account is not holding a sign saying, hey, I'm only $1 for a tutoring program. And this dollar is saying, I'm only $1 for the homeless feeding program. But your software will tell you that.
Right. And one thing I always speak of is, so I always understand the startup world because I help a lot of clients start, but I'm always speaking future. So if you're any person that's working with me, I'm never thinking like 6 months. I'm thinking 3 years down the line or a year down the line, you're going to get this type of funding. And so I'm always saying, make sure you're in the position to have what you need when you have the opportunity. And she pointed out a very big thing is that, yes, your bank account will never, ever, 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 ever tell you where all your money went, right? It's just not going to. You can kind of glance at it, but it's not going to give you like your overall income, expenses, especially maybe you have credit cards or maybe you put, some funding in there. It has so many different things commingled together. So at minimum, like I said, if you're in the first 6 months and you're just kind of just bootstrapping this and you don't really need something yet, fine. I always say don't spend the money if you don't have it. But once you start getting those donations, start getting into practice, because it's a lot easier to do it as you're kind of going through the months. than going all the way back and having to do it for a whole year and then remember, okay, I paid this person this for what? Like, it's just easier to kind of do it as part of your process.
Yeah. And since we're talking about bank accounts, I just want to jump in there. And we're talking about smaller organizations or startup organizations that may be bootstrapping, meaning that they're funding things from their own personal funds, or maybe the board is pitching in, maybe they have some volunteers, or they're doing some small fundraisers. It's so important, and I'm sure that you would agree, that organizations keep a separate bank account for their personal finances than from the nonprofit organization. And I've seen sometimes where organizations are just now starting up, but they're running things through their personal bank account because they're saying, well, I'm the person that's donating money anyhow. How does that make it a little bit more difficult, or what might be helpful for organizations to know that are just starting up?
Just get another bank account. I mean, it's really simple. I mean,
Yep.
honestly, like, it's not even it doesn't make any sense why you wouldn't. You know, the same way when you feel like you need more money, you go and open up a credit card, or the same way you're like, you know what, I want to open up a savings account. If you're running a business, operate like a business. I do understand, of course, unless you start this program and some amazing person just donates all this money to you. Yeah, I get it. But if you are self-funding, the easiest way I tell someone to self-fund is transfer the money from the personal to the business. That's the easiest way to keep track. Okay, I need $2,000 for the first 6 months to keep this business afloat. That way, once you transfer it, then you can really see, okay, well, I said 6 months, it's already been 3. So this also helps you to hold yourself accountable and understanding, like, what are the expenses for my startup? What am I really doing? When you're co-mingling with your personal and business, you don't really have an idea of what's the business and then what's personal. And as Janise said, as you grow, you start getting board members, right? And they may want to ask you in that first board member meeting, how's the money spent? How much money are you spending per month? You don't want to open up your personal bank account and share with share your screen with all your personal stuff in there, especially if you live in Vegas and, maybe you're gambling or doing something, whatever, right?
Wow, I didn't even think about that, but you're right. You're right. And so by a charity, a nonprofit organization being a public institution or entity, if someone wants to come along and audit your books or your bookkeeping or take a look at things, if you're running things through your personal bank account, you may be opening your personal information and business financials to scrutiny. I thought about that. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And you probably won't do that, right? So you'll just say no to that, right? So it just makes it easy. Just have it as part, just get a bank business, even if it's just sitting there dormant for, forever. Just, it's an easy process to do. Once you get that nonprofit, just open, like, have it as your next step. And it's not, and here's the thing, anyone who's watching this, who's been using their personal bank account, don't kick yourself, just after you finish watching the rest of this video and all the other training sessions, go ahead and in the next day, go ahead and open up your business bank account.
Awesome. Yes, I love that. Absolutely. And no judgment. We're just here to share information and help organizations to do things a little bit better than maybe they had previously. Yeah, absolutely. Tell us about some of the important financial reports or records that a nonprofit organization might need to be reviewing, whether it's on a monthly or quarterly or annual basis.
So there's 3 main reports, or 2 really, that you want to look at. There's the statement of functional expenses. That's kind of equivalent to what everyone calls your profit and loss statement, right? So that's going to tell you how much revenue is being brought in for your nonprofit. It also is going to tell you where that revenue is coming from. Is it donations? Is it, self-funding? Is it programs? Is it, grants? Where is that money coming from? And then also, where is that money being spent to? So you do want to look at that report on a monthly, at least a quarterly basis, right? And then the other one is the statement of activity. That kind of also tells you, like, okay, what are the balances in all your maybe multiple different bank accounts? Do you have unrestricted funds left? Is there open, grants? Maybe you've submitted your RFRs, which I'm sure Denise will talk about. And you're waiting for your money.
And that's request for reimbursement.
That's request for reimbursement.
That'll be in the grant writing session.
Yes, so I won't go too much into that, but just know the bigger the organization that you're getting money from, the longer it takes for you to get your money. So just have that in your mind that, like, if you're working with the federal government level, it would be amazing if you think they're going to pay like within a day. They don't. It takes weeks, sometimes even months. So it's a good way to keep track of like what is expected to come into your organization in the next, whenever it's going to come in.
Yeah. Awesome.
So those are the reports you want to look at. And then also you want to have them ready, especially if you have your board meetings with your board members. Those are the ones that they're going to want to look at and understand as well.
Awesome. And those type of reports can be something that organizations can get out of their software or the QuickBooks program?
That's correct. So that's why it's important for you to make sure your bookkeeping is done, whether you hire a bookkeeping person or you try to do it yourself. Because here's the thing, right? Let's just say, you just started your nonprofit and it's just you and maybe, 2 other people that are helping you, right? When it comes to all the expenses, you want to be able to keep track, especially if you have payroll, of how many hours. Okay, maybe Phyllis worked 20 hours serving the homeless, maybe the other 20 hours are just unrestricted funds. It doesn't matter. You have to know how to separate that out so that when the financials are sent, every program, you want to see how much did you spend per program. Even if all your money is coming in from donations, you still want to see like where's the money being allocated to? Do we need to raise more funds? Should we apply for more grants? Like where's our money coming from? And more importantly, where is it going? Even though you're a nonprofit and you're not going to pay taxes, you still want to make sure that you're using an accounting software to be able to do that for you.
Yeah. So it sounds like, starting with, one way in the beginning, but as the organization grows and becomes more sophisticated with accounting, it definitely needs to be working in some type of software. And for a person like me, I would happily turn that over to the bookkeeper, to the accounting professionals. And I'm just like, just tell me what it is that you need from me. What is it that you need me to do? And I will happily comply. So if you're working with someone like me who, I understand numbers to the level that I understand it, right? But I'm not as sophisticated, definitely, as a bookkeeper or a CPA or accountant or anything like that. What are some of the ways that you help your clients become more organized in their bookkeeping?
So the first thing is understanding that if it's not their expertise, right? So I have some clients who have an accounting degree. And even if you have an accounting degree, doesn't mean that you use it or actually want to be a bookkeeper, right? So the way that I help my clients is, hey, this is not your expertise. So I will be able to take care of that for you, recording those transactions for you, putting them in the correct locations, reconciling your books, sending you those financials, having it ready for your board members or a grant or a loan or a line of credit, and making sure it's available on a monthly basis. And then being able to have that high level conversation with you. So, really, if you're running a business, you don't have the time, to be honest, to look at, okay, I spent $12 on Amazon, right? And then to go into your QuickBooks and record it and attach the receipt and do that allocation. You should not have the time. Let me say that. If you have the time, then you're not focusing on the next step of growing your business, right? You want to get to the point where you don't have the time to do that level of detail. So hiring a bookkeeper, that's their passion. That's the nerdy side of them, is they want to do that stuff that you're just like, I have no desire to do that. But what's going to happen is when you're ready to do something, that bookkeeper is like, you need this report, it's done. You need this, your payroll, everything is up to date, and they're able to communicate whatever question that you ask. And then on top of that, they're going to be able to manage your funds. They're going to look at your bank account and they're going to say, okay, well, maybe we shouldn't be paying this bill just yet because there's not the funds. It looks like we could pay it 3 months from now, or, those type of things. They'll also offer you a professional, opportunity. So what I tell my clients, right, is if you are the business owner, you don't really want to be communicating directly with, the other accountant at another company or the other customer service person, you want to be able to be the CEO and have this like air of, I don't say importance, but certain things you should be delegating, right? And so my job is to communicate with the other person who's the accountant and have that conversation with them. And so now it looks more professional and you're not worried about those things because those things are being taken care of for you.
That's awesome. It's what we refer to as building the team, right? You are fulfilling a team member slot and working in your area of expertise so that the executive director and the program staff at the nonprofit can deal with managing the clients. Just like you wouldn't, as the bookkeeper or accountant, unless you're volunteering for an event, but you're not going to be sitting in the office performing case management services as the bookkeeper, right? Yeah. So everybody's kind of in their lane and working happily together. You mentioned payroll, and I'm so glad that you mentioned that term because that allows us to segue. As a nonprofit organization grows, there's this idea that they're eventually going to be hiring staff, and now they have payroll. How do you work with your clients in the nonprofit sector to help to facilitate payroll? Do you offer payroll services where you help them run payroll? And what are some software? We're back to software again because they can't be pencil and paper in it, writing physical checks. I mean, some organizations may do that, but there's so many other taxes or employer taxes that have to be subtracted and reported to different state agencies. Talk to us a little bit about payroll and what's out there to help.
Sure. So my company does do payroll, and you do not, out of everything, even if you decide to forego accounting software for a little bit of time, you must 100% have a payroll system. If you're going to pay W-2 people, you have to. And the reason is there's taxes. Even as a nonprofit, you still have federal taxes. You need to apply for your tax exemption. You need to pay people on time. You have to take the right amount of taxes out. You have to do all of these things. Trying to do the manual is insane and should not be done. Even if you hire someone, and I'm going to say this, if you hire someone who says they could do it manually, do not hire that person. Because it is 2020 whenever you're watching this, right? Because this is going to be eternity. So this could be year 3000. You have to work with someone who's progressive. You have to have a software. So there's ADP, there's Gusto, there's Paychex, there's Paylocity. There's so many different softwares. If you're working with an accountant, they're going to recommend some softwares to you. And you should be able to communicate and trust whichever one they tell you to use is probably the one that they're going to be most familiar with, right? One thing is, as a nonprofit, some payroll softwares offer a discount. So you can ask, hey, do you offer a discount for a nonprofit? But what that accountant person is going to be able to do for you is, we do full everything. We do the full setup for your payroll. So we're making sure that as the employer, everything's set up, but, making sure your employees are set up properly. If you have time clock situations, making sure that's set up properly, making sure the taxes are set up properly, onboarding, all of these pieces of running a business, are important and critical because those are things that will shut your business down. If you're not paying people, they won't show up for work. And then also a good software system will also pay your independent contractors. So you kind of need to know the difference between the two and how you're going to pay them. So something like Gusto, ADP, all of those things, they pay both types of people. The other thing that we do is in certain software programs, like I know ADP does it, QuickBooks, but also Gusto, you can track what program someone's working on. So this goes back to, especially with nonprofits, is, hey, we hired Phyllis of PKJ Consulting. We have a budget for this program from the state. She gets this amount. Okay, but she also is covered by operations for this amount, and maybe she's covered by this program. A software is going to be able to do that because when you're doing those requests for proposals, you have to run a report. They don't want to see everything that I got paid. They only want to know that I was paid to work those hours for that program. A software is going to be able to generate that report. And as a business owner, can you do that stuff yourself? Yes. Should you be? No, because you want to have a second level of eyes to make sure that stuff is done accurately. And you want someone who's an expert at it, who does it day in and day out to be able to do it for you.
Yeah. And I like that you are referring to nonprofits as business, right? Certainly nonprofit organizations, we know that they're a charitable organization and owned by the public, not owned by a person, but it should operate as a business. It incorporates with the state that it's operating in, and philosophically, it should run and operate in the way that a business runs and operates. Like you said, if you want to stick and stay around, then there's got to be policies, there's got to be processes to follow. And I'm just so happy that we're having this conversation, because I want our nonprofit leaders to understand that the organization, although it is nonprofit and the profit at the end of the year is not going to shareholders or any particular person, but you definitely want a nonprofit organization to be in the black, not in the red, meaning it should show a positive at the end of the year or in the bank account rather than the negative, right? Yeah.
Right. And, you know, it is a business, though. I mean, because here's the thing, right? If you are the type of person that's starting a nonprofit, hats off to you, because that is a beautiful thing. Most people who start nonprofits have a huge heart and they're doing it for a specific reason, right? The worst thing that you can do is say, okay, I'm going to start this nonprofit because I want to help the homeless people in my area code, right? And you start this nonprofit, but you're not running it like a business. You're not keeping track of anything. You're not doing any bookkeeping, you're not looking for grants, you're not doing anything. It's not going to bring any money in, right? And if you keep self-funding it, you're not going to want to keep doing that. You might as well just donate, right, to another organization. That's what's going to end up happening. You're going to end up donating to another organization that's running like a business, you know. So a lot of these nonprofit, the names that we know, the big names, you know, they all, Goodwill and all these other ones, they didn't start off like huge. They all started off, you know, small and grew because they operated like a business.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That is so key and so important. One of the things that will keep a nonprofit organization operating, functional, running as a 501c3 is we're back to kind of these reports, right? And reporting. And one thing that I know that nonprofit organizations have to report at some point in time annually is they have to give a reporting or accounting to the IRS on a particular tax form, the 990 form. Can you share a little bit about what the 990 form is and why it's important for organizations to complete that? And I don't know if there's a particular time of the year that those are due, but share with our leaders about that 990 tax form, because from what I understand, if they miss filing that 990 form consecutively for multiple years, their nonprofit status can be in jeopardy.
That's correct. So if you do not file your 990 for multiple years, it'll get revoked, meaning that you're no longer a nonprofit. So that goes back to, like, think of your why of why you started your business. So there's 4 types of 990s, right? And there's 2, let's say the most popular ones. So there's 990N, which is like a cute little postcard that you just mail it in. These are for the nonprofits that made less than $50,000 the prior year. The due date for your tax filing is 5 months after your year-end close.
Okay.
Most year-end closes are December 31st, but it could be June, November, June. It could be whatever you decided that when you set up your business, this is what it's going to be. But it's due 5 months before. Just like with any other tax return, you can file for free an extension to give you 6 more months. Meaning you have all the way until November 15th to file that return. So if it's the postcard, it literally is a postcard. You go on IRS website, 990, file it, takes 5 seconds. Now, as you start to grow and you want to get to the next levels, right, there is the 990EZ. These are for the ones that made between 50,000 and 200,000. Okay, so now this is where you 100% want to make sure you have a tax professional who has experience with nonprofit tax returns to do this, because The 990 tax return is drastically different than doing your own personal taxes. They want your information. There's a 990 PF, which is like you're personally funding this 990. It's not that popular, but the main one is the 990. That's where you're really pulling in some revenue for your nonprofit. It's anything over $200,000. And here's the difference between like a regular, your own personal taxes. You're just kind of look your W-2s and your Schedule Cs and you just have all the information. 990s are very difficult, which is why I say you need to make sure you have someone who has experience with them, because they want to know where's your money coming from, right? If you have grants, where's the grants? How much for each grant? How much for each funding? Where did you allocate everything to? Who's on your board of directors? How many hours are they working? Are anyone in the company getting paid as a board member and an executive director? What is the things that you accomplished throughout the year? Like all of these things. So think of like the 990 as a culmination of everything that you've been doing throughout the whole year. Now, how do you make this easier? By keeping track of your finances, right? So one of the most quickest ways to accomplish getting that tax return done is to be able to run your financials. So I think earlier I said, before I even jumped into this amazing world of nonprofit, I was doing tax returns for nonprofits, but I was working with a bookkeeper accountant who was able to send me the financials that were super clean, and then having a meeting with the the operations person to get all of that other information. This is why it's critical, really critical, that you have this information in place. You do not want to file an incorrect tax return with the IRS. You do not want to file that incorrectly. So you want to make sure all that stuff is in place, because your 990 form can be 30, 40, 50 pages long. So
yeah, that's good information to know, right? And we've talked about program development. We've talked about keeping track of success stories. We haven't got to evaluation yet, but that's part of keeping track of data and information. And this will help you, having all that program information and data, having details about clients or the number of clients served, having information about success stories, accomplishments. Who knew that it would help the organization to file its taxes, right? All that narrative kind of data. But the 990 gives the IRS a snapshot of the organization to demonstrate that the organization is still a charitable organization. It still deserves to have that 501c3 designation, because it really is kind of something that is granted to the organization for the certain purpose that they stated when they first applied for it. So this is kind of like a follow-up, a check-in to see if you're still pursuing organization was initially up to pursue.
Right. And I also want to point out that on your 990, it asks you, is this available, right? So at any time, someone outside of the organization can ask for a copy of that 990. So you want to make sure that you have that available as well. Like, where is this being housed to? Is it accurate, so you can share with someone who wants that information?
Yeah, and from my understanding, the IRS also publishes some of these 990 forms for the public to be able to view and see.
Right.
Yeah. So let's say the organizations that we're talking about, they're past that startup phase. They're really moving and shaking. They're bringing in donations. They're hosting events, perhaps. They've got clientele. They're getting grants. And so now they have reached a certain level of funding that if they are receiving a certain amount of federal grants or federal funding, then they may be required to have something called an audit. Can you talk to us a little bit? And I know that is an extensive conversation that can be had, and that'll be for another time. But can you give us a short snapshot of an audit? Why is that important? And what organizations might need to have to be prepared for an audit?
So I mean, think of an audit as the same way as if you think the IRS is going to audit you, right? So there's different types of audits. There's the IRS audit. And as a nonprofit, you do not want to be audited by the IRS from your nonprofit, because that means they're questioning what you're doing with the money, right? But if you are trying to get money on a federal level, they may ask for you to have a simple, hey, were these books reviewed by an independent accountant, right? So like myself, I don't work for the nonprofits. I'm just their outside accountant. I can sign off on it. Great, right? Then there's different levels. Okay, well, has this been reviewed by has this been reviewed, or has this been really a hardcore audit? So I'm going to talk about like the highest level of audit. This is where an outside company. So like, let's just say, even if you hire someone like myself and I'm doing the bookkeeping or accounting, you're hiring another organization because you do still want that extra checkpoint.
Like a CPA, like a certified public
CPA,
accountant,
or, and you want to make sure that that company has experience with nonprofits once again, right? Because every organization type is different. They want to see what your policies and procedures are. That's the first thing. And they want to make sure you're following them. So what is your fiscal policy? Okay, so we know that, you keep your documents in this fiscal policy. It says you keep your documents here. Give me this document on January 2nd, 2022. Can you find that quickly? All right, what's your payroll policy? Oh, well, you have the person who works for you also running payroll, but she's also processing her payroll and there's no one checking this. Okay, that's not, what is your policy? Does it follow something that's going to get approved? Where's the checks and balances at? How do you keep track of your donations? So the whole thing with the audit is, what's your policies? Is this something that's acceptable in GAAP principles? Is your bookkeeping up to date? Are your financials accurate, right? Does this look like the information is being done properly? Is the person, your bookkeeper, whoever's doing the bookkeeping, are they doing it properly? And is there fraud? I mean, unfortunately, I have had clients who have had bookkeepers who have stolen from their company, right? And so this is where an auditor or some outside person is going to kind of look and say, well, we see there's an extra $1,000 missing every month, right? If you're not, this is why it's key to look at your information, but they're going to say, well, where's this money coming from? And so the auditor is going to go through all of these things. If it's not the IRS, what an auditor is going to do is say, hey, these are all the things you should fix, right? You go back, you fix them, they're going to re-review, they're going to sign off. You will then be able to submit these high-level audited financials to the federal level funding. And I mean, now you're exposed to getting a lot of different grants on a federal level.
Yeah, that's awesome. And so you mentioned GAAP, and I just want to make sure for those people that are watching who may not know, those are generally accepted accounting principles, right? So when organizations are going through this audit, or they're looking for a professional accountant or bookkeeper, perhaps one of those interview questions as they're deciding is to ask, okay, does your organization help nonprofits to stay compliant with GAAP or generally accepted accounting principles? The answer should be yes, and then they can move on. Because like I said, people like me or some other founders or board members or staff members, they may not be familiar with these terms, but the GAAP principles are definitely like a roadmap that can help an organization to decide, are we doing this right? Are we doing our accounting right? Are we doing our bookkeeping right? These are the principles that will be able to assist them in knowing that.
Right. And don't fear an audit, because here's the thing, right? Even if your bookkeeper or accountant is running your business, everything's perfect, the money's coming in. The whole point of the audit is not to say everything you're doing is wrong. Well, hopefully that doesn't happen, right? Yeah. It's to have an outside pair of eyes to say, okay, this looks fine, but here's some things you may want to consider. Here's some things that you may want to change if you want to work at a federal level. So this always goes back to understanding what's your goal with your nonprofit. Are you just only going to have donations? What are you trying to accomplish, so that you can understand what type of audit that you would even need or want or must, get.
Yeah, awesome. I know that in the grant world, my experience as a grant writer has been that sometimes when you apply for grants, even grants that are not federal grants, like foundation grants or some state or county or city grants, they will ask, has your organization ever performed an audit? Do you have a copy of an audit review? Can you submit that? And so a couple of ways that I have organizations to respond to those questions in a grant application is one, yes, we have the audit and here it is, or no, we don't have an audit. And the reason is because our organization hasn't been around long enough to have the financial history that requires an audit. So if the organization has only been around, say, for 8 months, then it's not going to probably have financials to require an audit. Or perhaps the organization has been around for a while, but they haven't reached the level of type of funding that necessitates them having an audit. And so from what I understand, sometimes that really is based on the level of funding that's coming through the organization. If your organization has only received donations of, say, $10,000 or $20,000, it might not meet that benchmark to have to be audited or receive an audit. Yeah. All righty. So as a professional working in the field, I am wondering how you stay updated yourself on some of the latest and greatest accounting and or tax practices to be able to best advise your clients.
So in the same way that I kind of do a lot of speaking engagements, I actually attend a lot of them, so one thing is that I attend different tax and accounting seminars. I joined all the webinars. I would say join Facebook groups because they give you all the information of all the, new upcoming stuff. Every year, any new books that are coming out, there's books that has all the different new tax laws that are coming up for the next year. As a tax professional, you get exposed to like all these different things. So typically for me, throughout the year, I'm doing it, but hardcore around like October, November is where for me, I'm focused on like, what is the stuff for New Year? Because as an accounting professional, tax season doesn't start in January for me. It really starts like November, December, because I'm closing my clients' books. And any decisions that we need to make them before December 31st. So it's up to me to keep myself informed. And then typically on an annual basis, I also do my own tax seminar where I'm discussing with people like, here are all the new tax stuff to keep in mind for 2020, for the next year. So I have to have that knowledge.
Yeah, yeah. And so, just wrapping up here, what are some resources that you can share with nonprofit organizations that might help them to become just a little bit more learned, a little bit more savvy about operating a nonprofit organization when it comes to their fiscal management?
So the first easiest, quickest thing, there is a nonprofit for dummies. I know it sounds crazy, but like it's that yellow book. It actually has really overall basic general knowledge, easy read type situation. I would say another way is to go join some groups, right? Because then you're in the realm. So like I said, Facebook groups, I don't go on Facebook or Metaverse or whatever, I don't go on there to kind of chit chat at this point unless I'm traveling. But I join groups because there's so much information out there. So like I'm in a nonprofit for accounting group, right? So maybe join a nonprofit for whatever nonprofit you have, because they put on webinars and it's already in there. Yeah. Go on like Eventbrite, look, there's a lot of different resources that don't really require you to actually have to be somewhere because, we all are busy and we're all in different locations. Subscribe to some podcasts, right? There are nonprofit podcasts. You can listen to this as you're driving, on the way to work. So there's a lot of different things that you can kind of immerse yourself with so that you can kind of stay up to date and also learn. Take a class, take a course, right? Maybe taking something like this is something that's going to help you and expose you because it gets you that knowledge that you need to like, okay, well, I did all these different training sessions with the Grant Me Success training course, and I saw someone that I liked, I'm going to reach out to them to get more information on this specific topic, because maybe I'm great in all these other things, right? So, doing these things kind of tunes you into like triggering some stuff of like, all right, I should learn more about that.
Yeah, yeah. And I love that. It's kind of, as a leader, there is this sense of learning and being accountable to other people, right? As a nonprofit leader. And so you kind of have to be open and willing to learn more. And like you said, joining groups, joining associations, perhaps in your city, in your county, in your state, there is some type of state coalition or county association or nonprofit, leaders association or something like that. And just surrounding yourself around people who are doing the similar type of work allows you to be able to glean from them and continue to learn and ask questions. And like you said, even seeking out accounting professionals, whether they're bookkeepers or accountants that are offering various courses. Sometimes they offer them to nonprofit organizations at very low cost, and we're making things very simple nowadays. You can learn as you go. Like you said, you can learn in your car, listening to a podcast, as you're doing some other tedious work. Maybe you can have a YouTube video or something like that playing in the background. And so there's always these opportunities to learn, and then definitely getting literature and from all these different resources. The library, I seem to think that sometimes the library has gone out of style for some people, but hey, let's bring the library back to style, because there are some local libraries, maybe perhaps one in your city or in your county, that have nonprofit education centers. And so perhaps they have resources there, courses that are offered for free that can help you to learn some of these concepts for your nonprofit, fiscal management and just HR operations and program development, fundraising ideas. Phyllis, I am so happy that you decided to come on in with us to the Nonprofit Leaders Academy and share your wonderful wealth of knowledge about nonprofit bookkeeping and accounting and fiscal management. What would be some of the final advice that you would give to nonprofit leaders about their accounting and bookkeeping?
Just hire someone. I mean, I would say the two things. I would say hire someone who is going to align with what your goals are, right? Because you want someone who's going to be as passionate as you are. The second thing I would say is don't give up, right? When you are doing a nonprofit, it is not going to be easy, but enjoy the ebbs and flows of it. And also, when you're working with your bookkeeper or accountant, make sure you're having those meetings with them at minimum, and I keep saying minimum, on a quarterly basis, because you also need to understand the information. So hire someone, make sure you understand so that you can communicate to others when that accountant or bookkeeper is not around.
That is so awesome. Key information. If people want to know more, if people want to connect with you directly with PKJ, can you tell them how they can do that?
Sure. So I am on all platforms under PKJ Consulting. You can go to info@PKJ Consulting. You can go to my website. I offer a free 15-minute consultation where we can discuss all the fun stuff of accounting or consulting, or even, your tax return for your 990. And I'm also on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn as well, under PKJ Consulting and Phyllis Johnson.
Awesome. Thank you so much again, Phyllis. You guys, I hope that this information has been really helpful for you. Look, if you want to ask some questions of either myself or Phyllis, just drop those comments below. We'll take a look at your questions and reach out to you. Perhaps we'll do another video if you have some more extensive questions. But we just really appreciate you watching this, learning here with us. And we hope that you take this information and use this information to better not only yourself, the organizations that you work with, but also the services that you offer to the community. Thank you so much, you guys, for tuning in.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome.